Hey everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to this session. We have with us now the wonderful Addie Hanson from Woolly Pronto. Hey Addie, how are you doing?
Hi, good. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming back. Drawing flowers, I know is a pretty difficult thing to do. I've had a go myself. It's quite a difficult study. I've got a very good friend of mine who's kind of leveled up over the last couple of years in drawing flowers, who just drew and drew and drew and drew and then drew some more in order to actually get good enough to actually do it. So I know it takes some time, and I'm really interested to hear what your techniques are to help with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to, as I've learned more and more throughout my art career, how much dimension and perspective come into play. And so
For
that
sure.
is a lot of what we're going to be covering today, because that's what the Flower Builder kit helps accomplish.
Sure.
Okay, so what I have pulled up here is I have Procreate and side-by-side view, and this is the PDF guide that comes with the kit. And I wanted to pull this up first because we're going to be talking through more of the building side of the flowers right now and how to use more of the individual petals that come in the kit. And let me select that. So I have 3 brush sets included in this pack, and there's partial, which are clusters of 3 or 4 petals. There's individual petals that you can arrange, and then there are some full ones included. And
Nice.
you'll notice with the individual petals, they all have a time afterward. And I did this to help you decide where to place the petals. So it's like a clock position indicator. Hopefully that's universal. And I have these diagrams here, which are pretty small, but I can zoom in here. So
Awesome.
I
Oh,
also
hey,
want to
Addie, I think there
emphasize,
was some freebies as well associated with this session from memory. Is that right? Or is that for
yeah,
session 2?
I have the color palette, and we'll be using that both times. So
Awesome. Cool.
I want to emphasize that the clock position indicators are suggestions. Don't ever feel like you have to follow those rules. It's what you want. They're just there as like a base point to start from, so that you they're where it was originally drawn in place. So 6 o'clock is a good place to start. You can see these selections here are a lot of them are foreshortened, and that would be for when we're viewing flowers tilted from the side.
Nice.
So again, just a suggestion, but it's a good starting point, especially as you're trying to fill in the gaps as we go.
Sure. I love how you've done the perspective on the clock face there to make it really obvious what the actual the perspective angle is. It's nice.
It's a bit of a brain twist that you have to
Uh-huh.
do, because when you first start drawing, you look at things more as 2D, and then trying to
Sure.
build in that 3D aspect of it.
Yeah.
Um, that's where the challenge comes in, and it's something I don't think I will ever be fully done
It's tough,
learning.
right? Yeah. Like making that 3D
Yeah.
model in your head and it kind of always rotates and you're like, yeah.
Yeah, and it plays games because, for example, like this, oh, that's pretty light here. Find a dark color. Um, this petal here is essentially the same shape as like this one. And just because the perspective is flipped, it looks totally different. And I find this, when drawing limbs, if you're drawing a person,
So
that is
hard, right?
really tricky
Yeah,
because
really hard.
getting it to look right, and hands, which I'm
Yeah.
excited for Claudia's
So
session
I was
next
really
week.
excited that it's like it's like the human your eye is so good at saying that's wrong, but it's then so difficult to actually draw it right. You know it's not right, but it's like I can't quite get it. What's going on? Can't quite get it right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like our brains are wired to look for like consistencies and
For
patterns, and
sure.
so it is really easy to spot when it's wrong.
Yeah. But far more difficult to get it right.
Yeah, and I think that's also just an art challenge in general when
For sure.
you have a vision in mind and you know what you want it to look like, but you don't know how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so I'm working in the paper texture that comes with the watercolor and ink set, and this has 3 different paper textures combined in one, along with some different splatter options for different variations. So I will just run through quick to show you. If I color drop on this layer, you can see all of the texture come through.
Nice.
And
Genevieve in chat is saying the clock idea is brilliant. Yeah, I totally agree. There's a few people
oh,
saying how
good.
nice that is. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
When I first decided on that and I was telling my husband about it, and he cares not a lot, but when I was telling him about it, he's like, "Why didn't you just use degrees?" And I was like, "Oh, that would have
Don't get it.
worked too." But oh well, too late. I already named all the brushes. So these are 3 different splatter options that you can play around with. You can also turn them all off. But the ones that I'm using for this is paper number 2 and splatter option number 1.
Nice.
And then I'll be drawing all below this. I'm going to clear my screen. And I like to add in a few layers right away. And let's start off by building from a partial flower stamp. So if I go into this set, I wanted to make this kind of easy if you're following along at home. The very top brush, I think they should come in the same way on your iPad, is the partial curled 3/4 view. And I'll start with that. Stamp it once here. And then this is key as you go to add a new layer before you stamp a new brush. More times than I can count, I've forgotten and stamped on the same layer to like continue and try to erase something, and I end up erasing it all. So definitely be sure to add a new layer in between steps.
Cool.
And so from here, as you can see, what we're going to want to do is fill in the gaps. And like I said, you don't have to feel confined by the clock position indicators. You can also, I'll show you some ways to transform, distort, and warp existing petals to make them fit what you're trying to accomplish. But for the one that we have here, I'm going to start with the curled concave 5 o'clock. And I'm stamping once, and then I'm going to tap the transform arrow and rotate this to place it up here.
Nice.
Don't worry about overlaps yet. I think especially with flowers, when you're layering in petals and you don't necessarily know how it's going to look yet, if you can parse through, obviously one of these petals would be on top in an actual flower. And so you can decide that later if it's not too confusing to look at.
Sure. I love the delicate folded over edges of the petal. It's really beautiful. Not perfect, but still pretty.
It was really fun to put this together and look at. I learned so much about flowers, but I wanted to find like the happy medium of stylized while still allowing you to take your own path with it.
Of course. Yeah. I know from feedback from friends who've drawn flowers that, there's the little imperfections is what makes them look real. But then there's that balance of making it look pretty as well. So it's like, where's the, where do you draw that line? Quite a difficult thing to do.
Let's see. And then I'm trying to find one to fill in this gap. And for this, because this one is already foreshortened, the petal, the flower, if we're looking at this as a clock, is tilted kind of like that. And so if this one's foreshortened, the one that goes here is also going to be foreshortened. And so when I'm trying to decide, it might take a couple tries as you go through, and because you're working all on separate layers, it's really easy to swap out one if you just decide it doesn't work. Yeah. Generally, the I would say like the 4 through 7 o'clock petals here are more of the foreshortened ones. And even when, you know, I have some descriptors like curled or wavy petals, even when like the look of the petal doesn't necessarily match what you're building from, you're drawing over it in the end. And so you can customize that to match the rest of the petals.
Cool.
So for this one, I'm going to use the round foreshortened 630 and tap once. And on this one, I'm going to transform it and flip it horizontally. And so you can see right there, it fits in quite nicely.
Beautiful.
And I think that's good for this. I like that there's still some gaps here, that it's not too tightly packed. So what I'm going to do is decide what I want to lay on top and what is underneath. And I think for this one, turn it off and on so you can see the partial stamp that I used is what I'm going to erase. So that will be beneath the petals that I added later on. So I'm going to go down to that layer, and you can use any small eraser to do this.
Oh, Stuart asks how many types of flower petals there are in the set. Not how many stamps, but how many different types of petals from flowers.
So it's a very good question, and all of the flowers included are what are called polypetal flowers, meaning that they are generally symmetrical flowers with multiple petals. So it's not, the only thing I can think of is lady slipper, which is probably an obscure flower, but, or like daffodils. Yes, it's not like those flowers aren't included because they are not built up of a bunch of petals. They're not symmetrical. So besides that, there's generally like 4 categories of petals. There are like daisy, cosmo type petals. And I don't know that many kinds of flowers. Even for this, I can't always remember. And then there's like geranium, or even like wild rose petals that are a little more like rounded and crumpled, and then like buttercup or forget-me-not type.
I guess using this, is going to teach you a lot about the perspective, and tracing over it's going to teach you a lot about drawing any kind of petal really from those variations. So it will help you indirectly draw whatever kind of flower if you want to draw, if that makes sense.
That is a much better answer. That was much more concise.
Yeah, I guess looking at it, this is going to teach you so much about the perspective, about the forms, about what makes it pretty, about that, you know, the difference between the perfect petal and not quite perfect, but perfect enough to be pretty. So, you know, I would have thought.
Yeah, the kit is not meant to be constraining, and so everything. The colors that you add, any stylizing that you do, those are all going to indicate the type as well. So yeah, the goal is really to just help you learn to then draw any type of flower that you want.
Awesome. Getting lots of great feedback here from people saying how it's amazing how you figured out and made it so simple to work with. Thank you, Jenny.
Oh,
Sam saying this set is so cool. This is super helpful. Yeah, I totally go with that. I think it's awesome.
That is so nice. I love to hear that. I figured for beginners as well as seasoned artists, if this helps you save time, then it's worthwhile.
Absolutely.
All right, so what I've done here is I've pinched to merge all of those layers together once I erased the overlaps. And now we can move on to our next flower. And I kind of just build them on separate layers and then kind of arrange them after that. So I'm going to move this off to the side, and then on my new layer, move to this empty portion. And for this one, let's build from a circle. So not using the partial, just using the petals. And to do that, I'm using just an ink brush to draw my base circle. And I'm going to keep my pencil to the screen until it snaps into a quick shape. And just like with the clock position, this is one point that you're going to determine what perspective you're drawing in. So if I was going to draw one that was top down, not tilted or twisted or turned at all, I would draw just a true circle. But because I want this to be angled and viewed from like a 3/4 perspective, this is more of an ellipse. And you can even, I talk a lot about circles, but a lot of flowers are more cone shaped than circle. And that is another thing that helps you think about the dimension. And so if you want, you can add in some secondary guide circles for this step. So I have a larger one here, and I'm going to, once I have my quick shape, you can tap edit shape and move it and adjust it. And
nice. Your brain fills in the perspective of the cone, doesn't it? Really nicely.
Yeah,
You know, you
really.
see two circles, but I see a cone, and as you move it around, the perspective of the cone is definitely changing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the cool thing about this is that you have so much flexibility, and it is like those, like when you see a word that's got scrambled letters in the middle, but the first one and the one on the end are the same, you can still read it. Yeah, it's like that. Your brain for sure fills in the gaps. And so you don't have to do all of this every time. You can work directly just from one circle. You can not work from a circle at all, but let me pinch to merge these, and I'm going to decrease the opacity a bit, and then I'm going to build on top of this. So back up to my petals. I am going to stick more with the angular petals. And so for the further away petals, we'll go for the more elongated ones that are more of like the full true shape of the petals.
Cool.
Add a new layer. And I'm going to use the round, slightly concave 230. And this one, because we're starting to get to the side, this curved edge here is where the petal itself is starting to turn.
It's really lovely. I think it's invaluable seeing how you use the product yourself. Very interesting.
It is, like, I love watching other sessions too because of that very thing.
Yeah.
Seeing how the creator intends for it to be used. It's fun both ways. It's fun to come from it from a perspective of like trying to figure out how to use brushes on your own, and then like having your mind opened up to the possibilities from the person that made the kit. I feel like I've had that happen with some of Lisa's brushes.
For sure.
You know, figuring out how I would use it before watching a session with her, and then like her aqua reel brushes with the stamp.
Yeah, stunning.
Yeah. And so you'll see I transform most of my petals. You definitely don't have to. I like to because it helps me achieve, it really just like gives you more options, I would say. And so on this one, I think this is a little squattier, if that makes sense, than what I want for this position. And so I'm going to distort it a bit. So moving from uniform to distort, I'm going to pull on the corner here and kind of stretch it in to the perspective that I want.
We get similar proportions, I guess, for the petals, some kind of unified feel.
Yeah. And because these angular ones in the set are a little more flat, they don't have as much edge texture as the other ones. I like that more symmetrical look for them. All right, so then when I get down to here, I'm going to use one of the foreshortened ones, and this just has the one edge curled up. I'm going to position this, and still on distort. And then this overlap here, I'm going to use warp to just push that in. And you could use liquefy. You could also erase and draw over it too. And so you'll see I did like 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 3 o'clock to start. And that kind of helps me then figure out, just like with the partial stamps, where those gaps are and what needs to be filled in.
Cool. You find that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. All right. And then I also, some of the petals have like concave or convex. And so for this one, I'm definitely looking for that more cone shape. So I'm going to go with more of the concave brushes. I hope I got that right. It's been a long time since I've taken geometry.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you filled it in like a clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you might get to 11 o'clock and go, oh, that's not quite working. Whereas if you
Yeah, I think with the petal distribution, which, you know, it's not perfect. If you want that realism, you do want some imperfections, but in general, it just helps you space out the petals a little more.
Yeah, Sam's asking how many flowers would you usually, how many petals would you usually use for each flower? I think that's probably a good time to ask this question.
That is a good question. No more than 8, I would say. So I would say usually in the 4 to 6 range. But I think unless you're doing like a daisy or a cone flower, most flowers have under 8 petals. But it's your flower, and so you can add as many petals as you want. And if you were drawing, say, like a peony, then I suppose you'd have a lot more layered petals. And I'm not going to do one of those for this example because I think the amount of layers that you have to do there, it starts to get tricky. But yeah, a peony would be one where you would want to layer in the flowers more and more. And you can also use references. Something that I've found is looking at paper flowers on Pinterest. Okay. Something about paper flowers, they like reflect the light a little bit differently, and you can really see some of the dimension more. And these artists that make paper flowers are just brilliant. I don't know how they do it because they look realistic in every other way. But they're usually made with like crepe paper, and so it has a little bit of that texture. So if you look up paper flowers as a reference to help you understand some of the dimension and the twists and turns of the petals, that's a really good place to start.
Cool. I went out shopping with my partner recently. She was looking for some fake flowers. Those things are really expensive. Right, a good like fake flower, like whoa.
Yeah, I think they're more expensive than real flowers, right?
I think I'd stick to real flowers for now, I think.
Yeah. I had a friend that made paper flowers, and she would do people's weddings, which I thought was really cool. But nice. I think you're limited. Like you can only have so many flowers in that sense, yes, because one person is making them.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's a wedding florist. It's a cool job. Loads of
Yeah.
beautiful flowers, really stunning. But she specializes in wildflowers and, you know, really stunning.
All right, for this last one, I am going to go with a rounded one, and I'll just, when I draw over it, I will change the shape to fit the rest of the petals a little more, but I want this more foreshortened one that shows more of the underside of the petal. Okay, so now comes the somewhat confusing portion of erasing with these. And because there's so many layers here, if you have a shortcut to help you switch between layers, that can definitely speed up the process rather than going through and turning off and on each individual layer. So what I'm going to do, because I find that I build flowers kind of from the bottom up, I'm going to start on my very bottom layer, figure out which one it is. And I definitely do want to erase both sides of this so that it looks like it's truly on the bottom. And then I'll move up to my next one. And I think I will, and so this is the decision-making process. I think I will erase this side so that this petal here is above it. So just double check that I'm on the right layer for it. All right, and this one I definitely want to be underneath. Before I erase here, I am going to pull this one out a bit so that the curl of this leaf is under, or of this petal is under the one that's on top of it. So it's kind of like they're cupped together,
Holding
if that makes
it.
sense.
Yeah.
Yes. So then for flower centers, there are not flower center stamps in this because they are pretty straightforward. And this is kind of where I get into the territory of making up what flowers I'm drawing because they're not necessarily like coordinated with the petals that I'm using. It probably doesn't make sense from like this type of flower standpoint, but generally,
more about the visual.
Yeah. And especially if you're painting watercolor like we will be, it all gets a little bit more abstracted and it doesn't have to be as technical.
Sure.
And so there's a few different kinds that you can really easily quickly do. One of my favorites is just a line with a thicker end to do these like fronds coming up here and kind of like.
You make that look very easy, Addie. It looks brilliant.
So I'm using, I should probably tell you what brush I'm using.
Yeah,
I'm using
there was a question about the best brushes, actually. What are your favorite brushes for making the empty flower petals? So perhaps you could cover that with this one as well.
Oh yeah. So when you're drawing over them, is that what the question is?
I think this is probably for making the petals in the first place, but maybe you'll get to that when you're drawing over it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, when I let's see, when I drew the petals initially, I did that in Illustrator so that they were vectors. But anything pressure sensitive, I like because it helps give that more organic look. So the line weight isn't perfectly consistent.
Yeah.
So when I am on this step, this is just essentially my sketch layer. And so it does not have to be perfect in any way. I just kind of add this rough guide so that I know what I'm doing there. And then another really easy one, this is one of my favorites. I think I did this in most of the preview images that I did for this pack. Just do a lot of little curves. And this creates a little bit of dimension here and is super fast to do. And a lot of I learned about flowers somewhat. I know it doesn't sound like it from the words that I'm using, but when making this, I like tried to learn the terminology. But a lot of the center of flowers are actually small petals themselves. Not necessarily these fronds, because I think these are like carriers for the pollen, but like in a daisy, they are just small curled petals.
The yellow ones in a daisy, yeah. I had
Yeah,
no idea.
I think it's a daisy. If anybody knows and
Google it.
wants to
Bring it up
correct
on
me,
my
they
other
can.
screen.
Okay, so I have.
Yes, it is a daisy. You know what? I think if somebody wanted to use this product though to be anatomically more perfect with a flower, they could, right? Or if you want to use it to be more impressionistic and a bit more freeform, you can as well. So
Exactly. So I drew my centers on the same layer. So I'm just going to merge all of my flowers together, and then I will separate them so that we can make the arrangement. So I'm pinching to merge those, and then I'm going to use the freehand select tool. And when creating the arrangement, actually, let's make this on a separate layer so that we can easily layer them if we need to. So I'm using 3 fingers to swipe down to bring up the copy paste menu, and then I'm going to select cut and paste, which I did not do that correctly. Okay. Reselect, tap the transform arrow. Oh. There we go. So this, when I move them around, I'll be able to overlap them if need be. But I kind of like actually where they are right now. And then I'm going to fill in the space with some pre-made stamps. So if I go into the full set of these brushes, I'm going to choose some of these little Buttercup Flowers. Which again, these brushes, I actually named them, but they can be suggestions. They don't necessarily have to, you don't have to paint this yellow.
It does have a hint of yellow about it though. It wants to be yellow. Bit buttercuppy.
I'll do yellow. I'll paint these ones yellow for consistency.
Or blue, you know, that really nice blue. Forget-me-nots. Is it forget-me-nots? They're really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were really beautiful, vibrant blue. You get it in spring. I feel like any flower experts are just going to destroy me watching this. Going to, well, actually.
Me too. Send your corrections to me.
The blue one that's really nice. The blue one, the small blue one.
It's art. It's subjective. Okay. I think I did all of these on separate layers. Oh, not quite. So when making arrangements, you're not necessarily making a bouquet. And so the trick is to have a balanced composition without showing like the stems and having like a nice cluster of flowers without it being too crowded. And so this is absolutely just a lot of trial and error. But the nice thing about working on separate layers and using some of the pre-made flowers is that you can really quickly start to see how it might come together.
Sure. And then I guess you can play with the negative space and, you know, get the nice balance.
Yeah. And then it kind of gets to a point where you need to sketch in some leaves and use that to help figure out the balance. And so to do that, I'm going to be using the Inky Thick and Thin brush. And this is just going to be really rough because, again, this is the sketch portion. Try to figure out.
One of the questions that's been posted is, do you remove all the lines at the end from Jana? And I assume, Jana, that you mean in the sketch lines, you know, to be painting over it, or?
Yeah, so you can, you don't have to. You get to make that decision. I usually do because in the process of transforming, distorting, and rescaling things, the line weight is usually not consistent anymore. So I like to draw over that. And then that's also your opportunity to stylize it in any way that you want. And so if
these
you
are
want
just
something
a guide, really.
Yeah, but you also can use it as your final line work if you want.
Stuart asked, if you're trying to construct a dense flower like a rose, do you start from the inside and work out, or from the outside and work in?
It would depend if you are looking at it top down or from an angle. I think
we could look at that one at the end, couldn't we, if that's a...
Yeah, I think I would start from the outside and work my way in, because that kind of like would help when figuring out the dimensionality of it. I don't know. I think like in my brain, it would make more sense to work from the outside in, but I think it would also depend on how big the flower is and how many layers of petals. Okay, so I didn't even fully draw in my leaves here because I'm going to paint those in as watercolor later on. So what I'm going to do is merge all of these layers together. You can certainly select them all and put them in a group if you're not positive about all of your arrangements. But I'm going to go ahead and take a risk and merge them all together, and then decrease the layer opacity and start painting on the layer beneath. And to paint this, I'm going to start with the mid-texture watercolor brush, and I'm going to pull out my color palette so I can easily access these. And so this brush, all of these watercolor brushes, for the most part, are very flooded and wet. And so the definition and like darker edges that you get here won't necessarily stay the same if you paint on top of it. So if you want to get like a multi-layered look that would replicate if the paint dried and then you painted again on top of it after it was dried, you can just add a new layer. But for this, it's like painting wet on wet. And so because of that, to build up some more color at the edges, I like to add a lot of strokes over each other and not worry about how each individual brush strokes look here, because then I could go in with my final brush stroke, and without lifting the brush, I can flood it all together. It's like adding just like diluted paint and more water. And so especially with petals like this that are curved over, what I like to do is add that darker color here underneath, because that would be where it would be shaded. And then when I go to do the final brush stroke, that's when I color in this part of the petal, so the curve over. And then I'm going to smudge some of this out. The smudge that I'm using is the soft smudge from this set. And just blend it a little bit there.
And you're going to be talking more about the brush set specifically, aren't you, in the next session and how that's used?
Yes, yes.
Cool.
I just wanted to, I'm like trying to keep an eye on the clock. I wanted to get some painting in case
It's tricky,
people,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
in case you want to come away with something completely finished today. Should probably increase my brush size so it goes faster. And so, yeah,
very
tomorrow.
delicate.
Oh, sorry.
Very delicate. It's lovely.
Thank you. Tomorrow, I will be going more into some of the watercolor techniques that you can achieve with these brushes. For now, we'll just go with a rougher, filled in look here.
Oh. And if anyone's got any more question about the drawing aspect of this, or how Addie put the product together, etc., then please do, drop it in the ask a question now, because this is your chance to ask her those questions. I have a question actually. So you said you put them together in Illustrator. Did you draw them first? Did you do it? Did you analog and then scan and then trace it out in Illustrator, or did you draw it straight in Illustrator?
So this was the first time that I used the Illustrator app for the iPad,
Wow.
and it was a much more intuitive experience than I expected, because I think I'd used it when it first was released, and it didn't have all of the features that I had wanted.
Yeah.
But I was very pleasantly surprised with how far the app has come. You're able to pinch and rotate the screen like you can in Procreate.
Cool.
They incorporated the 2-finger tap to undo, which is just a second nature thing now that if I paint analog, I find myself trying to erase by 2-finger tapping on it. It was very easy to use, and I would recommend, because they're always updating. If you gave Fresco or Photoshop, any of those apps, a shot when they first came out and you didn't like it, if you have a subscription, for sure check it out again, because they have made a lot of improvements.
They want to catch up, right?
Yeah, and I think it's always good. Keeps the app marketplace competitive.
There's several people asking where these brushes are from, and these brushes are actually Addie's brush pack, and it's going to be shown in more detail in tomorrow's session. So do come along for tomorrow's session, because we'll get lots more detail on how they're used and how they can be used for watercolor in flowers, which I'm really looking forward to. Should be cool.
Make sure that I can get a little bit to the greenery before the end of the session. So I'll just do this one last flower and skip the other one. And we'll tomorrow go into some of the freehand flowers as well. And so it'll be a combination. We'll still use some of the floral brushes from the Floral Builder Kit, but I'll also do some just strictly painted ones. And I like combining the two, because you do get that nice mix of, a little more technical, a little more detailed, and then a little more abstract.
Yeah. I think it's amazing how quickly you've put this together. And I think that's a testimony to the product.
Yeah,
the product in the first place. You spent the time so that other people don't have to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you spend the time once, and you can use it in a myriad of different combinations. And so you can make really an infinite number of flowers, especially when you get into, that was one thing that I didn't show. If we wanted to use liquefy, let me show you on this one lone flower here. So once you get into distorting and using warp to transform them, or if you choose to use liquefy, you could really just like mold it into the flower that you want. And so if you do want to use liquefy to change the petals at all, under the wand tool, if you tap liquefy, and I like to start with the push option here. Oh, decrease my brush size. And say we wanted to add a divot to all of these. Just push that down.
Oh, that's really lovely. That's so cool.
And if you ever, let's see if I can get Reconstruct to work properly. Reconstruct is a really nice trick if you ever go too far and you just want to like nudge it back a little bit.
I'm wondering if the rest of the audience have a silly grin on their face like I have whilst watching you do this, because it's so cool.
Liquify is such a magic trick. It's amazing. If you ever need to, if you want to double check and see what it looked like before, a shortcut is that you can, oh, never mind.
Yeah, Pamela's saying it's lovely, and Narissa is saying the liquify trick is so cool. Yeah, it totally is, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is a very basic adjustment, but really you can just mold it, and it's nice because it's just like a one, like if you decide you don't like it, you don't have to undo a bunch of times. You can hit reset on the bar and immediately go back. Greenery, that's what we were doing. So I'm going to work on a new layer for that, and for this, I'm going to use the rough hue shift paintbrush. And this brush is very pressure sensitive for both size and opacity. And so the more that you press down, the more paint essentially will lay on the paper. And then with, it's hard to describe when you're using pressure and you're trying to show, but with lighter pressure, the line is very skinny and you can see it kind of runs out of paint towards the end. But if I use
bleeds out, doesn't it, when you use the pressure? It's nice.
Yeah. And so it's nice, especially if you're trying to blend things together, to be able to use that lighter pressure and get a more cohesive, watery look. So I painted all of the flowers on one layer, and then I'm painting the greenery on a separate layer. And I can tell I'm going to want to rearrange this. I'd probably move this sprig of greenery, tilt it so that the stem is tucked underneath one of the flowers a little more. So split up layers depending on your iPad capacity and how many changes you anticipate wanting to make. That is my recommendation.
Nita in chat is thanking you for all the top tips because you're packing them in, I think.
Oh, I love a good shortcut, hotkey, all of that. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead here and do some of the line work quick to show you kind of how I would translate the sketch layer into my own final line work. And so I'm adding a new layer on top, and I'm going to select, see if I can tell, this is dark gray. And so it's not quite black. I'm going to use one of the inking brushes. I think I will use the streaky ink brush. And so, oh, that's pretty big. This brush has some texture to it, and so that in itself will give the flower some character. So I'm not going to deviate too much from the petal shapes, and I've also painted them in. So I'm going to keep the same amount of folds and crumples and edge texture that we have here, because I like the amount of differentiation that this brush texture gives. But you can see I'm not following it absolutely perfectly because this is more of a loose look. You can leave gaps, you can change some of the lines.
Nita and Sam are just saying how beautiful the ink brush is. It's stunning, isn't it? Enjoying it very much.
And I'm going to hop down to my flower layer and go back to the mid-texture watercolor and paint in just some blobs for the center here. And then go back up to my ink layer to do the final fronds. It's definitely not the right word for it. Okay.
Here we go. I've cheated, brought it up in Google. It's a filament, and a little bit on the end is an filter. There you go. I'd like to say I knew that off the top of my head, but my friend Google helped me.
All right, tomorrow I will have the lingo down. Okay, so I think that's all that we have time for.
I think it
not
is.
quite done, but that is roughly how I would translate the initial stamp template into my own line work.
I think that's just beautiful, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I think it's 5 o'clock tomorrow, your next session as well.
Yeah.
So please, everyone, come along to see this being developed further, to find out more about the brushes, which I think just work absolutely beautifully. And I think it's always really lovely seeing a brush set that's been developed for a specific task actually being used for that task, you know, and you actually saying why and how you developed it, and it's very interesting for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that, like the clock thing made sense, because you know when you're creating this stuff, you're in a vacuum, and so it's nice to have it pulled out of my brain, and it's not utter confusion for everybody.
Oh, well, if everyone could give it up for Addie in the chat, although they already are. There was Sam saying thank you, and yeah, loads of really beautiful comments. Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you ever so much for packing in just so much detail and so much quality in this session. I know our community absolutely loved it. Again, do go check out the kit at the bottom. Have a good play with it. I can see lots of people who have already bought it or are going to buy it and have a play, which is always really good to see. There we go. Oh, thank you. The team's linking up the kit and the brush pack as well. And I know, you know, because I work with designers on exclusive products, so I know just how much time and effort goes into making these products, how much love, how much care, how much attention. So I get a big kick out of seeing them being used by the designers who made them. So, and I know how much pleasure our audience will get out of using it. So thank you so much.
If you make stuff, tag me too on Instagram. I'm just @WoolyPronto. I love to see what you guys make with the brushes.
Awesome. Thanks ever so much, Addie.